Cyberpunk Jordan.
This episode of Jordan's Soapbox was voted via my Discord server. If you would like to join and vote on future topics, link in the description. Jordan's Soapbox is a program supported via Patreon. If you want to keep my Volcano Hotel running, consider supporting it. And now, on with the show. Hello, my gummy bears. My name is Jordan, also known as CJ, and welcome back to Jordan's Soapbox, the show where I talk about anything that I want to talk about. So, as you can see, I did a little bit of redecorating around here, and that's because we have a bit more funding nowadays. So we can now add things like a vault for all the stuff I'm going to cover on this show, and a more slightly more stable reactor. But it's still the same show as always. But on this episode, I kind of have a bit of a confession to make. I was wrong last episode. Yeah, I know, kind of shocking me being wrong, but let me explain this one. See, in the last episode of Jordan's Soapbox, I made a video talking about Mecha Sally, one of the biggest mistakes of Archie Sonic for a variety of reasons. While I do maintain she was one of the biggest mistakes of this comic, upon further reflection, it was not the biggest mistake of the comic. Because for one thing, there were certain points that I made that I just don't think were right. There was a panel that heavily implies that Eggman was wrong about the immunity disappearing, for example, or points that were short-sighted. Mecha Sally would likely have been a satisfying character if the Worlds Collide reboot never happened. The other thing that I didn't make it clear was that the overall storyline was something that I genuinely enjoyed and wasn't bad at all. More than anything, it had the potential to be great if it wasn't, for what I just mentioned. So Mecha Sally, congratulations. You are no longer the worst mistake of this comic, and I've updated the last video to reflect that. Oh no, don't get me wrong, you're still a terrible, terrible mistake for this comic. Just not the worst one of them. Anyway, I can think of something far worse than that creative choice. How about a crossover special with one of the most popular comic book companies of the time? No, not that one. Try again. Yeah, there you go. Image Comics, founded in 1992, was made up of several ex-Marvel and DC Comics staff who were tired of the traditional comic book industry and the work-for-hire model that essentially saw creators reap very little rewards for their success. Why does this sound familiar? It was a notable disruption to the industry, and with successful comics under their belt such as Spawn and Savage the Dragon, Image Comics became a notable company in the industry. But what does this have anything to do with Sonic the Hedgehog, you might ask? Well, that's because the two worlds collided in Sonic Super Special number 7, Parallel Paradigm. Yes, this really doesn't exist. No, you're not dreaming. How this comic came to be is actually quite interesting, and its origin story can be found in the very issue itself, via a note from editor of Archie Sonic at the time, Justin Freddy Gabriel. Justin had worked on several crossovers while at Marvel, such as Archie Meets the Punisher, which, I am not kidding, was a very real comic that existed at one point in time. Jim Valentino, one of the co-founders of Image Comics and co-creator of Shadowhawk, had children who were fans of the Sonic and Knuckles comics. He asked if he could illustrate a pinup of Sonic in issue number 60, which is this, by the way, over here. Pretty neat. And Penders was...
Warning. King Penders mentioned the tape.
Oh, come on. I'm trying to fill in the audience here about backstory. You know I hate being interrupted like this.
It was a video a long time ago. I can't remember even though I'm an AI.
Right. Time to address a little bit of an elephant in the room. In the very first video I ever did about Archie Sonic, I made the conclusion that it wasn't worth further to talk about Ken Penders. I made that video not knowing that people would be really interested in me talking about Archie Sonic. They would want me to make more videos, and, well, here we are. And don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining about this. I'm really happy to oblige, because I love Archie Sonic, and I want to cover it. And there's also folks nowadays who have no idea what it is. And to me, they're kind of missing out on some of the best and some of the worst, as we're about to find out, stories featuring the Blue Blur. Not talking about Ken Penders is like not talking about Ian Flynn, Spaz, or any number of writers, artists, and more who contributed to this book. I won't be discussing any further developments when it comes to legal matters, which, gosh darn it, I really want to, but I am resisting it. Yes, it is breaking my own conclusion in that video, but I think it's one that my audience would totally understand, I hope. There, you happy, you bucket of bolts? I have got to get these robots reprogrammed, specifically by Maria. Seriously, they're more of a nuisance than help. Anyway, where was I? Yeah. Before it was so rudely interrupted, Ken Penders was tasked with coming up with a story that would fit the busy schedule of Valentino, and the result was a synopsis of a crossover between Sonic and Image Comics. Which conveniently leads to the first problem. Why? Like, seriously, why? I understand and think it's wonderful that Valentino wanted to do something nice for their children, but crossovers like these need to make some sort of sense to be effective. For instance, there's the crossover between My Little Pony, Friendship is Magic, and Transformers over at IDW. While these are very different franchises, they have similarities that make them a wonderful match. Both were popular toys in the 1980s, both were ongoing comics made by IDW, and both are owned by toy company Hasbro. Besides the medium of comics that they were in, does Sonic and Image Comics even have a connective tissue like this? I'd say no, and it's a crossover that I don't think either fans of Archie Sonic or Image Comics were really asking for, and the results were not fantastic in any sort of manner. We should likely start with the storyline, which is a confusing and frustrating mess. The crossover mainly revolved around a new character created by Penders named Particle, who, working for a villain known as the Master, steals the Master Emerald from Angel Island and brings it to the world of Image Comics. The Freedom Fighters, along with Knuckles, chase them down and team up with Eddie/Shadowhawk, who, along with other characters such as Savage the Dragon, must stop the Master. I summarize all of that in about 2 sentences. This comic takes 14 pages to start the actual events of the comic, with Sonic and company interacting with the world of Image Comics. So much of the reason why it took so long is because a lot of time on this comic is wasted on these two, Shoulder and Mully, 2 characters that are parodies of Mulder and Scully from the X-Files, with its creator even being thanked at the end. I don't mind having a little bit of a framing device to make this weird crossover work, but we already had that with Particle. Not only do these two waste a lot of the comic's time, but the comic also tries to fit in so many Image comic characters it's kind of ridiculous. A total of 6 to be the exact. Because of how many characters have to be introduced, it makes the comic feel extremely bloated and not have the time necessary for satisfying interactions between these two universes. And even when we do have these interactions, they can leave a little bit more to be desired. One of the most egregious, to me anyway, of all of these interactions, and the one that's often cited when talking about this comic, is Spawn, who only has 3 panels worth of comic time. 3 panels. Spawn, one of the most popular characters of Image Comics, a defining figure in the 1990s comic book world, only had 3 panels worth of comic time. Yikes. To be fair, I don't think all the interactions here are bad. There's ones involving Shadowhawk and Velocity that are wonderful, but there's just too many characters here. I would have liked it if they just stuck to 3 or maybe even 4. That way we can just spend a little more time with them and, properly introduce these characters to the audience and, kind of how they work. But because of how many Image comic characters this comic has to cram in and combine with the stuff with Shoulder and Mully, it also affects other important aspects of the comic, such as the main villain of the issue, the Master. Because you'd think that the Master would be a serviceable villain for the crossover, maybe having some backstory or kind of an evil plan to know what their true intention with the Master Emerald is. Yeah, no. Unfortunately, the master is as boring as dishwater. You don't even really get any sort of hint as to what his true intentions with that Master Emerald is. After witnessing him alter reality with a remote control-esque device, Sonic, like the reader, demands to know who he is. He retorts that, "As much as it kills me not to gloat, Hedgehog, I'm afraid I can't tell you until the final endgame." No, stop. Bad comic, bad. We want to know what the heck the master is, and, what the heck his evil plan is. That's what a villain is. I mean, yes, there is some hints that he wants to rewrite reality or something of that sort, but I mean, come on, just something, anything. Give me something to work with here. It also affects the conclusion, which is wrapped up in 2 pages with Knuckles tapping into the Master Emerald via encouragement from Dimitri, and that's it. Everything goes back to normal, the villain is defeated, and it's like the comic never happened. Alright, so the story is absolutely garbage where it's rushed and doesn't make sense, but what about the artwork? Oh dear. Okay, look, I think Jim Valentino is a very talented artist, and there were some others who also contributed to the comic, and I think they did a good job. But, yeah, there's definitely some, not great art in here. Expressions on characters are unintentionally hilarious, the way things are drawn makes me wish they were drawn a bit differently, etc. What a freaking mess. Sonic Super Special 7 should not have happened to start with because the 2 universes just simply weren't meant for each other. Even in the most ideal of circumstances, it still wouldn't have worked. But I think with the right choices, it might have been at least decent, but that's not what happened here. The whole issue is bloated and just crams so much in little time that it leaves you unsatisfied. It's one of those awful issues of the comic that, besides some things I could say about certain illustrations and moments, it has very little redeeming qualities. It simply needs to be thrown into the volcano. Oh, wait a minute. I can do that! So long, you piece of hot garbage! Wait. That was a rare issue that hasn't been ever reprinted? Anyway, thanks for watching this episode of Jordan's Soapbox. If you must excuse me, I think I need to go fetch that comic out of hot boiling lava. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Jordan's Soapbox. If you liked the video, consider subscribing to the channel with that little icon. Come on, you know you want to. And a special thank you to Jared the Lucario over on Patreon. You rock, dude. Alright, that's about it. Now get the heck out.